Good day, everyone. This is Esther from Chicken Feed Quilts back. We're going to be doing another tutorial today on the half square triangle trim tool by Creative Grids. We did this a few weeks ago. I did the intro to the trim tool, kind of gave you some tips on it, and we're just going to go a little bit more, or show you another method, I guess, on the trim tool today. So first we'll talk about the sewing machine. This is the Tan featherweight. It is an original. It's a 221J. Featherweight had 3 original colors when they made them. It looks almost white, but it's a minty green color, but it's like very, very light. The tan and the black. So this is the original tan one. I have all 3 of the originals. We used to think the red one was original. We'll talk about the red one on another day, but this is the original tan one. I have not tried to sew on it. I bought this one because it matches my longarm studio room for sewing. That one is done in, I was going to do it in bright colors, and the kids bought me this awesome Ruggables rug, and it's oranges or rusty colors and some blues in it and some tans in it. So I took one of Fancy That Designs lines. My walls are painted kind of a rusty orange on the bottom half, and none of my bright sewing machines matched it, so I had to get this one, and we brought it in for our tea party back in early May. And I haven't taken it home yet, so it should come home with me because it's kind of a decor item in that room. Kayla and I did learn a lot about these sewing machines in the last little bit, so I may try sew on it. I have all the oil and the grease and all that kind of fun stuff. And so one day when I have nothing to do, I'm going to try sew on all of my featherweights, which is not coming soon. But let's go over to the cutting table and learn another method with the half square triangle trim tool. We're back over here again with the half square triangle ruler. It's session number 2 on the half square triangle trim tool. I should remember to call it a trim tool, not a ruler, because it's not really a ruler. Last week we went over just a couple different 2 methods, I guess, on there. Leaving them pressed in half, opening them up, trimming them, marking them. There's just different 2 different ways to mark them and sew them. So this week there's one other method. Well, there's supposed to be a 4-in-1, and I don't know what the 4th method is. And maybe I should Google it, but I've never used it. So I've only used this method once. I don't care for it. But if you need to make a lot of smaller half square triangles, I got to get in the center of the camera, I think. Smaller half square triangles, and you have 2.5-inch strips or 2-inch strips or whatever left. Excuse me, you can start with them. And then this is one method that you cut before you sew. And I don't like it even for like a 2-inch half square triangle. I just don't care for cutting before I sew. But there's markings on here. And I just got to remember how to lay the ruler. I don't do this one very often, but it has a little black tip here. So that's going to go on the edge of your fabric. And then you should have a line here. So this is for the 2.5-inch line. So it's a white line, which is a little bit hard to see. I'll move my sticker or put a new sticker in. These are GE Design stickers. They come in several different colors. And these arrows are great to put on your rulers. They're movable. I can move this pink one off here. And some of my corners of my rulers have stickers piled up on them. But they're repositional so that you can use them for a long time. But if you're going over cutting a whole pile of stuff, it's really, really handy to just put a little sticker on to help you remind you where you're at to cut, where you have to remember to trim. You kind of get into a rhythm, and it's like, okay, yeah, I got the sticker. So I find they're the handiest little things ever. So I have just my 2 strips laid together. This is from a jelly roll, and I just lay them right sides together, and I find my little black mark up there. It's going to be a 2.5 because I'm cutting from a 2.5-inch strip. So you'd cut your strips first, and they would go, you can do it all the way to a 4.5-inch strip of fabric if you want, but you're always cutting on or sewing on your bias, and I honestly do not care to do that. So this is the 2.5, and I'm just going to do, so you're going to just cut it, and you're going to have your stitch line there already. There is a way to get this stitch line down here with the other side of the ruler. We're going to flip our ruler over, line it up on the angle, make sure that little black line is there, and this 2.5-inch line is there, and we're going to go and cut. So you're going to have them cut like this, and then you're going to take them to your sewing machine and sew them. Now, I do find that this little strip here gives you quite a large 1/4-inch seam. If I put it on there, I find this is a 1/4-inch here, and I find it's too large. Like this would be should be your seam line here if you're doing exact. So I guess it's very close, but I find it's quite a large seam. So you would go and stitch on that line, and then you go to press it open. So I did that. I think my seam got a little bit too big on this one here. Just give it a little bit of a better press. And I think they're supposed to finish at 2 inches, but I honestly cannot get a 2 inch. Like I cannot trim a 2 inch out of here. 2 inch finished. So maybe it's supposed to be a 1.5 inch finished. And I should move it up so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So I can't get a 2 inch finish out of this one. And this is one of the reasons why I don't like it. I'm a good, probably 1/8 of an inch too small. So I'm thinking that maybe the 2.5 has to, it's supposed to finish at 2, I'm sure, but it would be a 2.5 inch square and I'm cutting from 2.5. So maybe not. So maybe a 1.5 inch. So we're going to go 1.5 and we're just going to trim it. But I don't like the sewing on the angles before I start on the bias. I don't like sewing on the bias if I can help it. And the one thing about all of the trim tools that I have used is you always start with squares or rectangles, so you don't need to sew on the bias. That's the real handy part with the Creative Grids trim tools. All the trim tools that I have used so far, you start with squares and rectangles. So that's a 1.5 inch finished, and you do have a perfect half square triangle. So I guess if you're making a whole pile of them and you're doing small enough ones, you can just cut up your whole strip, take the whole strip to the sewing machine, sew your lines, and then trim them instead of starting with squares. If you're starting with a 2.5 inch square, I just want to sew this one to see if it's supposed to make a 2 inch. I don't think it's supposed to. I should know that. But I'm just going to take a little quick zip here on the sewing machine and see. Maybe I sewed it too big of a seam allowance on the last one. And that is also one of the reasons why I like the trim tools, is I don't have to watch my seam allowance on projects like this quite as much. So I can just go and sew and sew and sew. And I don't have to worry about seam allowances. So let's see if this one with a better seam allowance is going to give me a 2 inch square. And it is. So it was my sewing on my last one. So you can get a 2 inch square out of the 2.5 inch strip. So you get a little bit of a bigger, rather than using a square, if you have 2.5 inch strips, if you're sewing 2.5 inch strips together, you will not get a 2.5 inch square. It's just how these ones are cut that you will get a 2 inch square finished when you're done, but you're doing one at a time through your whole roll. But you can get several out of a jelly strip roll, or if you like scrappy quilts, you can use your extra binding strips if they're 2.5 inches and just cut them, take a stack to your sewing machine and sew on the bias. I think for me personally, the 2.5 is the largest that I will do with a bias sewing. I just don't like it. But if you don't mind sewing your bias, or your fabric is starched and you need to do a lot, you can cut 4.5 inch and just go and cut them, pre-cut them, and then sew them, press them, and trim them. So that is this method. The fourth method on this ruler, I don't know what it is, honestly. And I may have to Google it and let you know what it is eventually. But yeah. So it does say on here for these ones here, the 2.5 inch strip does a finished 2. A 3 inch strip does a 2.5. 3.5 does a 3 inch finished. So this way, it also is nice if you only have to make one of a quilt. You can just take 2 squares, line it up this way. There's some of them that you have to make 4 different half square triangles, but you don't need 2 of each. And some of the patterns don't allow you to make 2 of each. So this method works for that also, that if you only have to make one, if you're doing a sampler quilt and you have to have 4 single half square triangles and you don't have enough to make 2, some of them ask you to actually sew on the other side and then waste a half. You can cut them as a strip. And let me see if I have a 4 inch strip here that I can show you. I have some fabric from last week sitting here yet that I can possibly see if I have any left that hasn't been cut up yet. I have one more. I did mark it already. But if you only have to make one, you can just put 2 together like this. And now this one's going to be a 4.5 inch strip. So I do have to cut my strip down by 1/2 inch. So we'll just cut it down to, we can cut it down to 4.5, sure. So if the pattern only allows for you to make one and they only have enough fabric to make one, you can do this. So I have a strip. We'll pretend this one's a little bit longer than 5 inches, and we're going to put this on the 4.5 inch strip here. So we have a line here for the 4.5. We have our line here, and we have our little dog ear cut off here, and we're just going to cut this, and then we could go and sew this one and just have one half square triangle, and you still can square it up. And I did have waist here, but you know, if I was cutting it from a strip instead of from a square, I would have that waist, and I could use the rest of the strip for something else. So then I would sew again on the 1/4 inch, and then square it up like we've been doing. I need to go this way to make my 1/4 inch seam line. So I'm going to pretend I'm sewing here, and that should line up with that dog ear there. And then you can just go and sew on that line there. So that is the other method that I have used. I will say not very often, but I have used that on the trim tool. So next week we're going to come back, or the next time we're going to come back, and I'm going to show you how to make 1/4 square triangles yet with the trim tool. And that's it for this week. Thank you.